Thank you once again, George and the ABRS, for inviting me to do a whole series. We've actually called this series Elevating Equestrian Practices. And the bit that I wanted to just sort of open up with for webinar two, so this is our second in a series of 5 webinars, is...
Hop, ça a coupé.
Ça y est, j'ai compris. J'ai compris, je comprenais pas parce que je disais, merde, elle parle.
Oh, that sounds not English. Okay, so the reason why I call this an integrated approach is I hope today that you will get a real flavor for how, when we ended webinar one, we talked about in the Q&A about how there are so many different disciplines and different fractions of horse well-being and performance, that actually the one thing that unites us all is the horse. And I hope today in webinar two, through the lens of the 5 domains model, you'll see how essential it is that we integrate all our lenses because of our desire and motivation to improve the lived experience of horses. So I'm going to push on and let me I hope I get through this in good time. The reason why I say that is I have actually set myself an alarm. So that will keep me on track as well, I do hope. So if you hear the alarm going, you know that hopefully I will be wrapping it up pretty quick after that. And we do get 30 minutes for Q&A, which I would love to hear your questions. Okay, so first up, you'll see this overview. And the reason why I've popped this image from the Horse and Hound is we're in such rapid pace of change. And I mentioned this in webinar one. I do personally recommend that you layer each webinar one after the other. But of course, each webinar is standalone. So if you haven't yet watched webinar one, I definitely recommend it. It will be a really nice layering into today's webinar, all about application, the application or applying the 5 domains welfare model. And that's what you can see in the overview. So moving forwards, I just really wanted to talk about the pressing challenges we face as a riding centre, a livery yard, and a riding school, equestrian centre and a livery yard. And that is, we're really up against environmental pressures, financial uncertainty, and horse welfare gaps. And I say that with the knowledge that earlier this year, in January 2024, the World Organization for Animal Health acknowledged the significance of the 5 domains model in their vision paper titled Animal Welfare, a Vital Asset for a More Sustainable World. So we can start to recognize that the 5 domains as a model for animal welfare is not a guiding principle. When you start to see the framework of the World Organization for Animal Health applying and recognizing the significance of the 5 domains model, then we can recognize that today's webinar and how we help ease our grassroots pressing challenges is by turning towards solutions that are actually already available. But we need to apply the 5 domains. And it really refers to, from animal welfare, the physical and mental state in which the conditions that the animal lives and dies in. And again, this really is just coming out of the World Organization for Animal Health. But like I did in webinar one, I wanted to sort of place where I am in this intersectionality for improving the lived experience of horses. So in webinar one, if you haven't yet watched it, I explain my positionality. But for our second webinar, I really want to explain about the intersectionality of all these sciences. And what you'll see here is I've actually borrowed the word Wissenschaft. So it is German. And what it actually is for me, it's a better reference to the English term science, because it includes all forms of scholarly and systematic inquiry. It's interdisciplinary, the word. It bridges the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, formal sciences, all come under this one umbrella of this organized knowledge or pursuit of knowledge. And it has a cultural importance importance in Germany. Wissenschaft is this integral to academic tradition, and it emphasizes the value placed on rigorous, methodical research and education, which leads me into what I've done in upskilling myself. I've been and gone through an online course created by the University of New England in Australia. You'll hear me reference this throughout, so all credit to Christina Wilkins, who is a PhD candidate from the University of New England, because this is an exquisite online course that I'll talk a bit more later as I go through today's webinar, but it's all about applying the 5 domains in order to improve or assess welfare of the sport and recreational horse. So I want to start with a document you're going to receive as well, along with my slides, which is this white paper. You'll see it called Good Welfare for Equids. And this is written by my colleague, Professor Natalie Warren, and another colleague actually of hers. And in the opening of this white paper, you'll see this image. And why I love this is I think a lot of people aren't used to hearing the phrase life cycle, but you can start to see that it is actually quite complex, the life cycle of our horses, starting with birth at the very top, and obviously their end of life with their death. And we look at this as a life cycle where they're bred for purpose. And you can see here that we are today applying the 5 domains for grassroots horses, or the leisure horse, which is in that bottom right. And it's a really nice visual of this understanding more about the life cycle of our horses. From this white paper, you can get some real clear clarity of the difference between quality of life, which I've got here. So this is an image from the white paper, reference from Green and Meller in 2011, and the welfare state, which I will explain in more detail. But in short, the scientists in animal welfare science have agreed on of welfare definition as the state of the animal's body and mind, and the extent to which their nature is satisfied. And that's the definition from Fraser et al. In 1997. So we can start to pick out, well, how does that differ then to quality of life, which is what I've just circled. So what you'll see here from this image from the white paper is the variation from a life not worth living to a good life. And what that has in a good life and a quality of life and how it differs is it's both the positive and negative experiences, but mostly landing for that individual with strongly positive. And it's achieved by this full compliance with best practice advice above the minimum requirements of welfare. So what I want to do now is I want to just use again another image from the white paper. Why? Because it beautifully explains fluctuations. And if this is the only image you remember from today's webinar, I think it would be really helpful as we try to move forwards, resolving our pressures in riding schools and equestrian centres for the gaps in horse welfare. These fluctuations for an individual, and remember, it's their subjective lived experience, which I'll come back to again shortly, but it's their ability to fluctuate like you and I do throughout a 24-hour day between these negative and positive experiences. And this fluctuation isn't about adding up so that as long as a horse's ends up with a total in a good or positive experiences, and that's a good life. What it actually helps us do, and why I would like us to spend a bit of time looking at this of the fluctuations, is it helps us to recognize the importance of resolving the negative experience. So food restriction, if we are feeling hungry, is an important signposting for us to access the next meal or calories that we will need to fuel the next activity, which could be for a horse essential for their behavioral repertoire, such as foraging. So, and play and choice. So we're starting to recognize that these negative experiences are not necessarily about the fact they exist, but it's about how they are able to resolve these negative experiences. And that's where you and I come in. Just once again, I want to highlight off the white paper, the leisure horse is there. There's a definition for it, which moves me nicely into our brand new for 2024 British Equestrian Charter for the Horse. I'm delighted by this. Congratulations to everyone, all the member bodies, including the ABRS, who have created the charter and then pledged to the charter. And what I'm really excited about are two areas, in particular, this one here, the pledge to consideration of how horses learn, and a pledge to health and fitness. And what I love about this is being able to actually apply learning to continually improve our equine knowledge and how we're going to keep evolving our own behavior as humans, as equestrians, based on education and inform quality of knowledge from professionals and the wider equestrian community. I just wanted to place and land that here now. That's what I've just been talking about, because this is really about looking at the value of using the word welfare or horses faring well. Here you can see it's signed by the ABRS, Jane Williams. And what this really means for us, all of us, is leaning into positive change and using evidence-based knowledge. And so here you can see that the field of animal welfare science is where I'm coming from for today's webinar. There are many, many publications, especially in the last decade, all about something called the 5 domains, which is what the title of the webinar is. And what we're actually doing is turning the dial towards positive change by making continual improvements. And that really is the essence of today's webinar. And we're trying to look at the word resolving negative experiences, and I will come into practical application of how we as equestrian centres are actually achieving that. Okay, what I want to do now. So the 5 domains has been around for about 30 years. So let's not think of this as something new. It's actually been around really quite significant amount of time as an update from the 5 freedoms. Now, you're not going to hear me mention them very much at all today, other than the fact that the reason why the domains has superseded or evolved or had its update from the 5 freedoms is because the actual ability to assess through the 5th domain. So what I want you to see from the 2015 version is we have 4 domains that feed into number 5. That is massively important. The sum of number 5 is made up of the other 4 domains. That's the first difference from the freedoms. And from the 5th domain, we can make an inference on the state of the animal's welfare. But we did better than that. As always, we're constantly evolving and updating in the field of science. So in 2020, we now have this latest iteration of the 5 domains. And what I love about the 2020 version, so it is important to find out which version you are working with in your own equestrian centre. This is the most current and the one that I highly invite you to work with, because now you can see we have equal weighting of the physical or the physiological domains on the left, from nutrition, the physical environment, and the health and fitness of the animal or the horse, to meeting equally on the right-hand side. So we have equal seats at the welfare table, the behavioural domains. It's been split into something called 4 for behaviour. A is interactions with the environment. B is interactions with other animals, and C is interactions with humans. And that is where the difference lies from the 5 freedoms. It's very important that you recognize that the freedoms has no representation conversation around you and I and what we bring to the animal or horse's lived experience as humans. So that is the key difference, that 4C is not covered by the five freedoms. So who's been applying the five domains? Well, for some years, we've got all these organizations. Not only have they been applying them, they have been leading their field in thoroughbred breeding. Certainly in New Zealand, you'll see this document here. You've got the Animal Welfare Framework document from Racing Victoria. We've got various key documents, including World Horse Welfare here on the left-hand side. They've done an exquisite visual of the five domains model. Congratulations to the team. We've got representation here on today's webinar. And being able to see that Pony Club, like the next generation, have really got their heads around this, certainly from Australia. Anybody got any guesses who which organisation have recently added the code of conduct for horse welfare to their I want to call it manual, and then have specifically identified the five domains? George, will you have a quick look in the chat for me? Does anybody know? I've just done this, who this actually is. Has anybody got any idea? Any guesses? A little bit of interaction for our delegates. I'm not going to come out of my visual screen, George. Are you all right? Are there any guesses happening in the chat?
No guesses, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, congratulations and I really believe we should always be finding opportunities to provide positive experiences. But I really want to take the time out to congratulate British Dressage. This was actually an update they did this time last year in December of 2023, that they actually specifically mentioned the five domains. What I'm interested in, and that's why I'm bringing it up today, is the application. Having it in writing is fantastic, but what does it even look like to apply the five domains? So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. First up is the central tenets of the five domains. You can see my own visualization. I created this. I've got, and I showed it in webinar 1, if you're still not sure. I wanted it to be layering, but there are 3 central tenets. First one, let's identify negative experiences. More about that later. Then I want us to resolve, or we need to be able to resolve as a second central tenet, that negative experience. But the third one is provide opportunities for positive experiences. And this is where things get very interesting. This is where we can start to make an assessment on a mental state and then an assessment on welfare state, which feeds into the white paper of the quality of life of that individual animal. It also looks like this from a couple of my colleagues. So this came out of Australia. There's the 4 domains, the physical functional domains 1, 2, 3, and 4, leads into the mental domain, which feeds into the welfare status. So you're getting a real picture of this layering. This is another image as referenced here from my colleague, Christina Wilkins in 2023 from the University of New England, from that 5 domains welfare assessment course. What I love about this image is you can see that at the very bottom, we've got from poor or compromised, neutral to a good welfare state. But this is all good and well until we actually think about the word welfare. So now I want to just put this to all of us. Do we actually ask in the person we're going to have a conversation with their understanding of welfare before we have the conversation? And I just want to sort of invite everybody to think about this, since I've been thinking about this particular fact, that if I'm looking at 6 and you're looking at 9, both of us are going to double down on the fact that we feel that this is what welfare is. So you now need to actually, before we, all of us, myself included, before I have a welfare conversation, which I'm doing today, what is your understanding of welfare? Now, I've given us a little bit of a heads up of a definition, but once again, let me repeat it. It is the state of the body and mind, not just the body, but it's the extent to which the individual's nature is satisfied. So the physical state and performances of a horse is important, but so is the horse's subjective experience, or I could say lived experience. And it is actually as perceived by the horse himself. Now that causes us some problems. We can't ask the horse, but that's what we would do if we could. We are getting closer, and I'm going to talk about that again later. So how I explain this to my students and to my clients is if you split up the word well and fair, and I picked this up from the University of New England's course, you can actually be thinking about, is the horse faring well? So I like to sort of do that as a little bit of a heuristic, which means like a fast track in your brain. If you are thinking about welfare as the horse faring well, what we can agree on in a conversation when we start is that it's beyond care. So if I'm trying to have a conversation about the horse's lived experience or their welfare, but the other person is meeting me around care and the fact that they're well cared for, that could be a point of balance in terms of quality of life, as opposed to a good life or the opportunity to live a good life. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm trying to help us all understand where we come from when we discuss the word welfare. It's why the FEI's Independent Commission actually named itself the Equine Ethics and Wellbeing Commission, as opposed to the original suggestion from the FEI, which was welfare. Because without making this sort of clarity of what is it we're talking about or definition, we come into very grey area. A couple more things before I get stuck into the application. This is one of my students from Hartbury University. This was her dissertation that I supervised on. So what my student did is she took the central tenets of the 5 domains and she adopted the UNE's checklist for horse welfare for the 5 domains and created 12 questions adopted from the checklist. And her group was students, and she basically found out what evidence did they have of one, identifying the negative experience. So here's my example is the sun. The sun is essential for life, all life forms. However, between the hours of 12 and 2, we all know, either through experience or through education, it harms us. In fact, it can do so much damage to us. It changes our cells, it mutates our cells, and we can experience the negative experience of skin cancer. So we know that between the hours of 12 and 2, what we end up doing is resolving that negative experience by either wearing sunscreen or always wearing sunscreen, and we come into the shade between the hours that it harms us. But what we don't do is we don't try and take the sun out of the sky. So what my student did in her research was she wanted to find out what examples do students have for can they identify negative experiences off the UNE checklist? Can they actually resolve those negative experiences? But the third one, what suggestions did our students come up with to give horses a positive experience? And the results were really, really interesting. The first 2 central tenets were very well covered by students, with a huge gap in knowledge and application of the 3rd central tenet, which was the inability to add something that was positive to their horse's lived experience. I will come back to that, but in the meantime, I want to push on. I want us to really quickly go back 50 years. I can't believe it's been that long ago since we saw Scooby-Doo and the Mystery Inc. crew. And what I want to do now is I want to invite us all to look at the importance of, when we are assessing our horse's lived experience, the importance of teamwork, the vet, the farrier, the physio, the coaches, the bridle fitter, the saddle fitter. They're all contributing to different perspectives within a very similar situation. And like Scooby-Doo, they are helping to solve the mystery. And for Scooby-Doo, it was always about some sort of hunched old grey man wearing a glowing mask, trying to make a profit or prohibit some land from being sold. And that was the most important lessons that were learnt. Because none of them could actually capture the villain in the cartoon without the teamwork. And that's really my invitation for in this webinar, is to think about how the team work together, no better than Mystery Inc. crew. Okay, there is our Scooby-Doo. So let's move into assessing our horses' lived experiences in riding schools, equestrian centres and livery yards. We're going to use a word called telos. All it means is species-specific behaviour. And that obviously varies for species, but we know our species, we know horses. We know that horses' telos is unique characteristics of anatomy, physiology, ethology, which basically means their behaviour repertoire. And here you can see that they are a social species, they pair bond, they live in family bands, and the other word is cognition. All of those make up their species-specific behaviour. So we need to get our team around us as detectives, just like a Scooby-Doo. We bring in the vet, we bring in the behaviourists, equitation scientists. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find clues of animal-based indicators such as species-specific behaviour, and then situation-related indicators such as tack and equipment that we bring into the situation, such as in-hand and under-saddle training. So what is a clued up equestrian or a clued up riding centre? It's because we can't ask our horses directly, which we've always already identified, that we have to rely on curiosity. I'm inviting us all to lean into our curiosity so that we can detect their lived experience with confidence. And how do we actually do that? We're going to use the word inference, and we're going to do that by understanding quite a lot of areas that we can have robust inference with. So the first area we can actually have this strong inference is a paper that was an academic paper published in 2018 from Hall et al., my colleagues in equitation science. And we can make some really robust inference on our horse's emotional state. But in a few more years, we will not be too long off. So far, we have trained artificial intelligence. We're at the point of machine learning, and we call this sort of the machines are sort of at the stage of like a toddler, where we're putting in the alphabet in order for the machines to deep learn facial expressions. We've successfully done this with dogs. That was 2 years ago. Where we're heading now, and we're on it already, is with horses. So we're literally not far off the machines learning in a way that supersedes any human and all our biases and subjectivity, that can actually read the emotional state of our horses. Well, that really excites me as an equitation scientist, as a applied scholar. But in the meantime, let's just look at what this paper offers. It actually says to us, do you know what? We can pick up the emotional state of our horses by recognizing their arousal levels and adding the word valence. I will explain that. So, what about the arousal level of our horses? We know that our horses, when they are highly aroused, they are fully awake. You will talk about their vigilness. You might look at their brachiocephalicus, which is that big neck muscle. You will have a behavioral image of a highly aroused horse. So we're putting in brackets fully awake. You'll also have an image in your mind of a horse that has low arousal. And actually, asleep is a really good low arousal state. And then there's everything in between. So we have this physiological and behavioral readiness for us to actually make an inference from as Scooby-Doo, as a detective. What I want to do now is talk about the word valence. Let's look at this horizontal axis. So I've talked about the vertical axis of arousal. Now you can see this horizontal axis is about positive and negative experiences, or how that feels for the individual. Some of you might think, oh, actually, you have a belief that you actually enjoy ice cream. But some of you might be like, actually, I don't enjoy chocolate ice cream. That is your valence. That is a negative experience to that flavour. And the reason why I mention this is because if we take the top right-hand corner, we've got here a horse that, for sake of this webinar, is a stallion. He has just clocked eyes on a mare ready to be served. And so now you can see that the valence is positive for this individual, and he is in a highly aroused state. But as we then, let's stay on this right-hand side, that the horse feels good. So that's this positive feeling good. That's what the word valence means. We've now got a lower arousal, and we're looking at this word relaxed. I've put a picture there with another horse in it because we know they're a social species. So we're making that sort of inference that with that other horse being there for that species specific behavior or telos, that the horse has this positive valence. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I shouldn't have done that. On the other side, I'm not going to go back just because it will mess up the whole viewing, but on the other side, you will see that we had high arousal and actually negative valence, and it was a horse rearing at a competition. The horse was probably, maybe, I'm going to make an inference, trying to make the two pressures stop, leg and reins together. Perhaps there was fear. Perhaps there was anxiety around the area. And so we have high arousal, negative valence. And the last one was low arousal and negative valence. And it was actually a horse in constant pressure, wherever the horse was trialing to remove these pulleys that was keeping the horse restrained, actually goes to no avail. And so the horse was apathetic and stops trying, and they start to give up. So you can start to see that we can make assessments on their arousal, of their overall emotional state by adding arousal plus whether an experience is positive or negative. What I'm going to do now is show you how I've been applying the 5 domains. This is actually one of my students' work. You can see here, these are horses that are stabled. I don't know if you can notice on your screens, I know some of you are watching through your phones, but if you can zoom in, even on the recording, you'll see something called a social window, or we're looking at under the umbrella of social housing, but what's been cut out by the owner of these horses are windows between each of these 4 horses. And it's really interesting that we ask ourselves under the 5 domains model, the 4B, the behavior for horses to interact with other horses, how long a horse gets to spend interacting. And the thing that's really important, can horses also choose not to interact with another horse? So let's just look at what's happened here. You see the grey horse has popped their head through the social window, whilst the other horse actually has no interest or regard for that. So the proximity of the grey horse does not really matter for the black horse. But my gosh, the proximity really matters for the grey horse. And you can start to see how by putting in a social window, it did actually have an impact. So when we're talking about can horses get to resolve the negative experiences that they have, actually, we can go past that. We can help resolve the isolation of stables and stabling by providing a social window. And what we may be actually being able to get evidence of is going into a positive experience where they get to explore safety through maybe even curiosity or joy or pleasure by giving them the ability to resolve what was negative. Remember, I said the grey horse needed to resolve their negative experiences and spent a lot of their time. But the black horse really did not need the grey horse to be in their proximity. And that's what matters, their individual lived experiences. And that's why having these blanket solutions as a trainer, a coach, a vet, a judge is not optimal for the mental and physical state of that individual horse. Okay. We are supposed to take each of the 5 domains, break them down so that we do get to resolve for the negative for each domain. And we are meant to work one domain at a time. And I do actually guide my students to work through domain 1 right through to 4 in order to then make the final assessment or welfare assessment of the 5th domain, the mental state. So once again, let's add these 2 together for 4C, the animal-based indicators with the situational related indicators of the interaction with humans. What does this look like? So with the permission of Christina Wilkins for today's webinar, this is the welfare checklist in the top left. And It really is a beautiful set for each domain of 3 questions. But the first thing we have to do is decide whether we strongly agree or strongly disagree, excuse me, and everything in between, which is the next bit. And then off the back of that, we get to decide and make this objective assessment off that data, whether there's an overall grading for the domain 4C. And it's for each of those domains. So what I've done in my own application with my students and my clients is I've taken the clues, because we're being clued up, detective, Scooby-Doo, and I've taken tacking up as the first in the chaining of events for the horse's lived experience of interacting with humans. It really works in equestrian centres and also for one-horse owners. But the reason why I've taken tacking up is it begins to give us a window into these 3 areas of the welfare checklist. The first question under 4C is, does your horse have healthy bonds with their carer? And then we go into how they feel about, are they confident and safe, the horse, around familiar people? And is the horse calm in the presence of most people? And the reason why I've done this for under saddle, for tacking up for under saddle, is we're getting evidence of research of lesions in the horse's mouth or oral lesions. And you can start to see that we might be really presenting with negative experiences because of how we then interact with them under saddle and in hand, which is this is my specialism, this is my domain. But what I'm trying to work out is how does a horse feel, and where can I then make the inference of their mental state in this domain? So what I wanted to bring to all of us now is look at the importance of learning theory, which is what we've all signed up to in our member bodies in the horse charter of how horses learn. The least amount of pressure, followed by the release of pressure for the correct behavior, resulting in the ability for horses to actually be ridden or in hand in self carriage, which basically means that they keep going until we, the rider, the handler, signal otherwise. Speed, direction, and head and neck. And that really matters, because when this isn't happening, why it matters is because we have recognised legally in the UK in 2022 that horses are sentient. And we have now put that into our legislation. We knew this anyway, but to have that legal support matters. And therefore, the work of my colleagues, the equitation scientists of Jana Winter Christensen and Meta Udall, they presented this paper this year in 2024 where they looked at conflict behaviour, and in particular they found increased knowledge of behavioural signs of pain, discomfort and frustration, often labelled as conflict behaviour in horses, actually can increase awareness by riders, trainers, officials, judges, that it's the first step towards reducing this occurrence. And they took a field of a total of 22 horses. They did an unannounced inspection for oral lesions immediately after leaving the dressage arena. 5 of the 11 horses had abrasions of the skin and or mucosa of one or both lips, and were then eliminated from the competition according to the rules of the National Equestrian Federation. It's a really great paper, and you'll start to see that when we bring and apply the 5 domains with 3 central tenets, starting with identifying negative experiences does start with research like this. Let me take this a little bit further. Let's get really into the application, tacking up, tack and equipment. Let's look at how we can take bridling, and let's take that as its first negative experience. And then how do we resolve that for them? And you might want to talk about fit and the comfort of the bridle. And actually, it's not just about the fit or the tightness of a noseband, but it's about the comfort of the whole bridle and how we resolve that for the horse. And then where do we go with providing positive opportunities? So I've got a couple of videos for us to watch. The first one is, let me just press what it is. This video has come from one of my colleagues, a really fantastic vet, and in a minute we're going to hear from this person, but the key here is to be able to watch this horse's video of being bridled. I've only stuck to bridling, and we're going to watch this with the question: is the horse interacting with familiar people confidently and safely? The reason why we're watching it is because Sue Dyson has done considerable research, in particular a paper back in 2021, on being able to use tacking up as a window or into an investigation into pain in both saddle fit as well as rider fit, balance and lameness. And we're just going to take a look at this. Okay, there's quite a lot of content there. I'm hoping that you've all noticed. And now you're going to get to sort of strongly agree or strongly disagree that the horse interacts familiar with confident and safely. I am going to now show you, I'm going to jump now to the next video, and we're going to make the same decision, a bit like Scooby-Doo as a detective, on the next horse. And then I'm going to explain the two after that. So this is from my client out in Italy. She is a vet called Donatella Loni, and she reached out to me and said, can I do a way of bridling a horse that will help my horse actually find bridling a pleasure? So this brings us on to the central tenet of number 3 of the 5 domains, which is, can actually putting on a bridle and a saddle have a positive experience. Now, because I coach Donatella and I've worked with her for some years, I also know what's happening with the other 3 areas. So one is lightness. Does the mare get to experience lightness from the rider? Does the mare get to experience the release of pressure? And does the mare then actually get to be trained in self-carriage? So I know, because I've worked with this combination for many years, that that is exactly where they're at. So when I gave Donatella the content for making the bridle reinforcing, so she could train the bridle to be this positive reinforcement for the horse, this is what she captured for us on video. There is no sound for a bit, and then it kicks in. So this is Donatella. So she's adding something attractive because of the desirable behavior that she had, and that she marked it with the sound of a cluck and then added that food reinforcer. Okay, so what I want to just quickly comment on before we move on, I just want to pause there. The very first video, you would have noticed the horse's eye, and there would have been other specifics that you would have lent into. That video was gifted to me by the brilliant horse advocate Dr. Sue Dyson. And why we have actually collaborated for today's webinar, which really excites me, is because we both share that passion and commitment to improving the lived experience of horses, both in performance and in the grassroots. I haven't got very many minutes left of today's webinar, but what I have done is invited Sue. She's currently in the US. I don't know, is she with us live as well, George? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. Have you muted yourself, or am I just struggling?
No, I don't see her on the call.
Okay, Sue is currently out in the USA. She was trying to hop in live to join us, but in her absence, she's pinged me after we spoke together about the ability of the 5 domains to bring us together as two experts in our field to collaborate over the exact same task that we both have, which is tacking up in order to make an inference on the lived experience. That very first horse was actually diagnosed with pain and discomfort, and you would have picked that up in the video. I'm confident that you would have. The second horse is actually what we trained for the horse to find the bridle, the reinforcement, because of achieving the correct application of learning theory or removal reinforcement in Donatella's training of that horse. So over to Sue now. I'm going to hand it over to Sue and her pre-recorded slides.
I'm Sue Dyson. I've been a lifelong rider and ridden up to upper national level. I've been an equine veterinarian specialising in lameness and poor performance for more than 40 years. I've also been involved in clinical research, and I've also gained the instructor certificate of the British Horse Society.
Oh, I'm up.
By collaborating with Lisa Ashton and applying the 5 domains, it is our opportunity to both collaborate, co-create, and improve the sustainability of riding schools. Through the pillars of health and human-horse interaction, we need to identify the negative experiences, resolve those negative experiences, and enable the horse to have better opportunities. I care a lot about the future of riding schools. I believe that they are essential for providing opportunities for people from all walks of life to engage with horses. But I have some concerns about their future with respect to both financial sustainability and the welfare of riding school horses and ponies. I think that there are studies from the UK, Switzerland, and Sweden that have demonstrated that there is a high incidence of musculoskeletal discomfort. And I think more effort should be made to recognise this. And as a consequence of that, there is a need to improve physical and mental well-being of the horses and ponies. This high incidence of musculoskeletal discomfort has a number of consequences. Obviously, it's a welfare concern. I believe that it has an influence on the performance of the horses and ponies, their willingness to work, and also there are some safety implications. It also has an effect on their behavior. We tend to have thought that behaviors such as ears back, repeated tail swishing, opening the mouth are normal behaviors. But we have demonstrated that these are not normal behaviors. However, exposure of beginner riders to these abnormal behaviors from the start of their riding careers results in these behaviors becoming normalized and accepted. And this has an impact on the rest of the equine population and the persistence of the many myths of the equine world, that we have lazy horses, those that are unwilling, grumpy, ungenerous, nappy, resistant, whereas we should be asking, why are the horses showing these abnormal behaviors? I think there is the potential role for the use of phenylbutazone or other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory analgesic drugs. Provision of pain relief may alter behavior and make horses more willing, more goey. However, does this mean that they will be less suitable for a beginner? Or does it mean they will be easier to ride? They will be more comfortable for the rider, enabling the rider to sit in a better position, with the horse being more responsive to the cues. I think it's important to dispel the myth that there are high risks with the persistent use of phenylbutazone. Horses tolerate phenylbutazone much better than people, and side effects are relatively unusual at appropriate doses. In fact, there was a study performed in Canada in polo ponies that showed that the use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, including phenylbutazone, actually reduced the risk of equine gastric ulcer syndrome, presumably by relieving pain and therefore reducing stress. So I think when we're considering phenylbutazone or other analgesic or pain-relieving drugs, we need to be thinking about the risk analysis, the cost-benefit ratio for equine welfare, and perhaps this is an ethical dilemma for future discussion. The other area that I think we should be thinking more about is the use of a horse simulator for teaching beginners. For me, this will potentially enhance prerequisite skills of balance, coordination, and application of the cues. It will facilitate the development of appropriate musculoskeletal strength, and it may also reduce any apprehension or fear factor, so that the riders progressively gain confidence. So what are the motivational grabs for a beginner to be riding a so-called mechanical horse? Well, I think the use of a machine is leaving horses better. The beginner rider potentially increases their speed of learning to be better and get more enjoyment more quickly, and therefore enabling the horse and the rider to have fun, and for the horse potentially to escape the confines of an arena, removing boredom and removing the association with discomfort. A win-win potentially for both the horses and the riders.
Okay, thank you, Sue. That was Sue's very co-created way that her and I have actually collaborated for today's webinar. What I want to do now is just pick up on a few things that Sue and I have been discussing, in particular, this ability to leave horses better. It certainly is my invitation to bring into how we interact and apply the 5 domains through the lens of Professor Nat Warren, which is what she presented at the World Horse Welfare Conference only last month, which is "What is a Good Life for a Horse?" was the title of the conference. And Nat's urge for us all was to actually embrace new evidence, because change is inevitable. With new knowledge, new technology, and societal values changing, that we can actually create opportunities for positive welfare. So how have I been doing this in the work that I do as a consultant and sort of working with students is I think Louise will be here today, so she can take questions in the chat. But we're certainly doing a community of practice. And this is that image I mentioned and I shared in webinar 1. So again, please go back and watch webinar 1, where we're actually understanding that the horse is all about the 3 Fs. And there's a 4th one that I introduced in that first webinar. And then we're rippling out to the 5 domains, specifically that word fortitude, because our riding school horses are having this level of accumulation of positive experiences that in those fluctuations of their day, in the lived experience of a riding school horse, actually helps them to live a good life. And the key isn't adding up all the good experiences throughout the day, but the key is helping horses to resolve their negative experiences to then get into their positive experiences that we can facilitate by applying evidence-based knowledge, getting transparent with what we're doing, so inviting in the local communities and being able to then earn our community's trust, which is massively important for public acceptance and narrowing the gap in horse welfare. The last thing that Professor Nat Warren talked about is this number 5, which was the shift in the baseline to a new normal. And you'll see here what Nat's written, or what's visually she's done, is gone from poor welfare, where it's at the very lower end of the bell-shaped curve, shifting the whole curve from actually being in this sort of neutral, heading towards positive welfare. And this is where our focus should be. And certainly my invitation to all of us as centres and hubs of learning and knowledge, that, you know, we know horses are sentient beings. Now it's going to be earning that public trust of how we leave horses better than when we first met them for every interaction that we have. So leaving horses better as a community of practice is something I'm deeply passionate about. It's where I've been spending the last 18 months working. You'll see here on this slide, and you'll get the slides after this presentation, that I am very dedicated to the application of learning theory. And so in 4C, are you able to have the transparency that our horses receive the least amount of pressure as cues, because actually we're applying removal reinforcement, which is the release of that pressure because of the correct behavior, in combination with keep going until we signal otherwise, i.e. children, adults not creating this relentless pressure because maybe the horse is already habituated to either relentless rein pressure or relentless leg pressure. And now we're in that scenario where the riders want spurs on or bigger bits because actually the horse has had to habituate to the other. So wrapping this up, am I coming up to my timing? I think I might be. Great. Further resources, I thought there'd be lots of questions in the chat about this course. I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful online resource. It is about 20 hours worth of work that is actually a pleasure. And certainly everyone that I know who's finished this course and has been certified have thoroughly enjoyed the experience. And we still hop in and use the resources to keep updating our own application of the 5 domains. It's about the application. So really, oh, not that, there we go. Really, once we actually now have these resources, this knowledge, now we know better, we can actually do better. And that mirrors webinar 1. And my last slide, so that you'll all be pleased to hear, is come and join me as I keep building the layering of these 5 webinars. For the 3rd webinar, can we actually understand our horses by defining and observing with objectivity and curiosity, on the 6th of Jan, 12 o'clock. Thank you very much.